You've probably spent a few minutes scrolling through a dozen CNC routers, wondering if any of them are actually worth the space they'll take in your workshop and the money you'll spend. The fear of buying a machine that sits idle because it can't handle the material you need, or worse, a machine that eats power and then gives you a half-finished job, is real. And if you're sitting there thinking, is this the one that will finally let me carve that jade pendant, cut a metal bracket, and still be precise enough for a PCB prototype? You're not alone. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The DYNAMI 2200W 6090 CNC router lands in the middle of a crowded market where you have compact hobby-grade units on one side and industrial-grade gantries on the other. What makes it stand out is that it tries to bridge that gap: a 2.2 kilowatt spindle, a 41/28-inch aluminum alloy workbench, and a 4-axis controller that promises both power and precision without the need to build a custom frame. Before we get into whether that promise holds up, let's talk about the practical realities of getting a machine like this up and running. First off, you need a solid floor and a dedicated power circuit. The 2200W motor draws a decent amount of current, so you'll want a 240V outlet or a well-rated 120V line with a dedicated breaker. If your garage is wired for typical household loads, you might need an electrician to add a circuit, which adds to the upfront cost and time. Once that's sorted, the machine arrives mostly pre-assembled. The aluminum frame bolts together with just a few hand tools, and the large workbench folds out like a sturdy table. The easy operation claim isn't just marketing fluff. The controller's touchscreen interface walks you through homing, zero setting, and tool changes with on-screen prompts that even a newcomer can follow after a quick glance at the manual. Now, let's imagine a real-world scenario. Say you're a small-batch jewelry maker who works with both soft metals and brittle jade. You need a spindle that can hold a fine 0.5 mm bit for delicate engraving, yet also spin a 1/4-inch carbide end mill for cutting a metal bezel. The 2200W motor on the DYNAMI can comfortably maintain the torque needed for those heavier cuts, while the precise control system lets you dial in micro-step resolutions for the fine work. In practice, users report that the machine holds its position well. When you switch from wood to aluminum, you won't see the little drift that cheaper routers sometimes suffer when the load changes. That stability comes from the rigid aluminum alloy frame and the linear rails that guide each axis, which together reduce vibration and keep the cutter path true. Another everyday use case is a prototyping shop that needs to make printed circuit boards and acrylic enclosures in the same day. The large workbench means you can lay out a full-size PCB, run a 0.2 mm engraving pass for the traces, then flip the table over and slot a 1-inch acrylic sheet for a case. Because the controller supports code directly, you can feed the same files from your CAM software without having to reconfigure the machine for each material. That flexibility is where the value starts to show up beyond the headline specs. You're essentially buying one machine that can replace a dedicated wood router, a small metal mill, and an acrylic cutter. Of course, no machine is perfect. The biggest trade-off you'll notice is size and noise. At 4,128 inches, the workbench is generous, but it also means you need a fairly spacious shop. The frame, while sturdy, is heavy. Moving it even a few feet requires a couple of people. The spindle, when running at full speed for metal, generates a noticeable amount of acoustic noise and a bit of dust. If you're in a residential area or sharing a space with other creators, you'll want to invest in a sound-absorbing enclosure or at least a good ventilation system. That's an extra expense that isn't mentioned in the spec sheet but can't be ignored if you care about neighbors or indoor air quality. Another nuance is the learning curve. The 4-axis controller is powerful, but it assumes you have some familiarity with CNC basics, setting work offsets, choosing appropriate feed rates, and understanding tool compensation. If you're brand new to CNC and expect a plug-and-play experience, you might spend a weekend just learning the software before you see any actual cuts. The easy operation label is accurate once you've passed that initial hurdle, but it's not a magic button for absolute beginners. So, who should walk away with a DYNAMI 6090, and who should keep scrolling? If you run a small fabrication business, a makerspace, or a serious hobbyist who already has a CAD/CAM workflow and needs a reliable, versatile machine that can handle metal, wood, acrylic, and even jade, this router is a solid match. The combination of strong power, a large, rigid workbench, and a precise controller means you'll get consistent results across a wide material range without having to buy separate machines for